Someone invites you to dinner. Not a meeting, not an event. Dinner at a house with about 9 people. The food is good. 2 of them ask what you actually do, then ask a second question about the answer, which almost nobody does anymore. Somebody remembers something you said an hour earlier and brings it back up. You leave around 11, feeling better than you felt in months. Nothing happened, nothing was asked of you, nobody mentioned a belief, a leader, a book, or a fee. You were not recruited. And you have already completed step 1. Now you're watching this because you're certain it couldn't be you. That's not arrogance. Everyone thinks it. It's the single most common belief about this subject, and it's held almost universally by the people it later happens to. Here's what everyone will tell you. Cults get the lonely, the gullible, the desperate. They brainwash people. Something breaks in you, or was broken already, and that's the opening. And obviously you'd notice. But recruitment does not target weakness. It targets social instincts that are functioning completely correctly. And when a researcher actually followed people through the process instead of interviewing them years afterwards, what she found was that recruits weren't unusually vulnerable, weren't unusually gullible. And the brainwashing story turned out to be mostly wrong. There was no spell. There was never a spell. There was a sequence. Welcome to Cyclophy. Today we're going to break down the 7 stages of how recruitment actually works, why being intelligent makes you easier rather than harder, and how to recognize the sequence when it's running on you. 'Cause some version of it currently is. One warning before we start. Something in your own life is going to get named in this video, and you're not going to enjoy which one. Let's get into it. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Nobody joins a cult. That sentence sounds like wordplay. It isn't. It's the whole mechanism. Nobody in history has ever sat in a room, been offered membership of a high control group, understood what was being offered, and said yes. What people join is a dinner, a meditation class, a study group, a house share with unusually kind people, something ordinary, defensible, and enjoyable. Membership is not the first step. Membership is the last one. By the time anything is formally offered, the person accepting it is not the person who walked in. They've been changed slowly enough that each individual change felt like nothing at all. Which raises the question everyone gets wrong. Who actually says yes? In the late 1970s, a British sociologist named Eileen Barker did something almost nobody in this field had done. Instead of interviewing former members years later, when the story had hardened into something explainable, she followed people forward. She attended the workshops. She tracked who came, who stayed, who left. Her findings, published in 1984, quietly dismantled the accepted picture. The people who attended were not the broken and the desperate. They were disproportionately young, educated, idealistic, from stable backgrounds. They were, by most measures, doing fine. And the conversion rate was terrible. Of everyone who attended a residential workshop, the overwhelming majority never joined at all, and a large share of those who did join left within a couple of years, entirely on their own, with nobody rescuing them. Sit with that. If brainwashing were real in the way it's usually described, a technique that overrode the will, it would work far more often than that. Something that fails on most people it's used on is not mind control. But it isn't nothing either, because it does work on some. And the ones it works on are not the ones you'd predict. So if it isn't a spell, what is it? Here's the part that changes everything. Picture a ratchet. A simple mechanical one. It has teeth and a pawl that drops into each tooth as it passes. It turns one direction easily. It cannot turn back. Now notice the design. Each click is tiny. If you were asked to make the entire rotation in one movement, you'd refuse instantly because the size of the request would be obvious. But nobody is ever asked to make the whole rotation. You're asked to move one tooth. And one tooth is nothing. It's dinner. It's a weekend. It's a small favor for people who've been kind to you. The engineering isn't in the size of each request. It's in the order they arrive in, and in the fact that no click ever reverses. This is why survivors so often can't answer the question everyone asks them. When did you decide? They can't answer it because they never did. There was no decision. There were 40 small ones, arranged in a sequence, each one reasonable given the one before it. You will not catch this by watching for a big moment. There is no big moment. That's the design. So why doesn't being clever protect you? This is the part that stings, and it's the reason educated people show up in these numbers. In 1954, a psychologist named Leon Festinger heard about a small group who believed the world would end on a specific date. He and his colleagues joined them and waited. The date came. Nothing happened. And the group did not dissolve. Most of them came out of it believing more firmly than before and started recruiting in a way they never had. Festinger's explanation, published in 1956, became one of the most important ideas in psychology. When your actions and your beliefs contradict each other, the discomfort is real, and the cheapest way to end it is almost never to admit you were wrong. It's to generate an explanation that keeps both. Now think about what that means for a capable mind. Justification is a skill. It uses intelligence, verbal fluency, the ability to hold a complicated argument together. A person who is good at thinking is good at building the explanation for why they're still here and why the thing that would look like a warning sign to an outsider is fine in context. Your intelligence is not a shield in this situation. It's a tool, and once you're a few teeth into the ratchet, it starts working for the other side. The people best at spotting the sequence from outside are frequently the worst at spotting it from inside. Their reasoning is simply too good. So what does the sequence actually look like? 7 stages. Each one arrives disguised as something ordinary. Stage 1. The warmth that isn't a tactic yet. The first thing you get is real. Attention, interest, people who remember what you said. It is often the most genuine social experience the person has had in years, which is exactly why it works. And it's why contempt for members is both cruel and stupid. What makes it a stage is not that the warmth is fake. It's that it's abundant, immediate, and given before you've done anything to earn it. Ordinary friendship arrives slowly and in proportion. This does not. The tell, closeness that has outrun the time you've actually spent together. Stage 2, the small yes. In 1966, 2 Stanford researchers, Jonathan Freedman and Scott Fraser, asked homeowners to put an enormous, ugly sign about safe driving in their front garden. Almost everyone refused. But one group had been asked something tiny 2 weeks earlier, just to display a small sign in a window. When that group got the big request, agreement jumped enormously. The small yes changes who you think you are. You are now a person who does this sort of thing. And the next request isn't measured against your old life. It's measured against the last thing you agreed to. The tell, the requests are getting larger, but each one is only slightly larger than the last. Stage 3, the private language. Here's the stage almost nobody notices, and it might be the most powerful one. The group has words, sometimes invented, more often ordinary words that mean something specific in here. Robert Jay Lifton, writing in 1961 about coercive environments, called this loading the language and listed it among the defining features of a totalist system. Language does 2 things at once. Speaking it marks you as inside. But more importantly, thoughts that are easy to express become easy to think, and thoughts the vocabulary has no room for become genuinely hard to hold. Objections get harder to formulate, not forbidden, just difficult, in a way you can't quite locate. The tell, you've started using words with people outside the group that you have to stop and explain. Stage 4, the gradual replacement. Nobody tells you to cut off your friends. That would be alarming and you'd refuse. Instead, the group's schedule expands. There's something on Thursday, then something on Sunday, then a weekend thing. Nothing is forbidden. There simply isn't time. Your old friendships aren't severed. They're crowded out, and every hour of the crowding felt voluntary. Then comes the part that seals it. Your old friends start expressing concern, and the group has already told you they would. Their concern is now evidence that the group was right. The tell, the people who've known you longest are worried, and you've stopped taking that seriously. Stage 5. The problem only they can solve. At some point, you'll be given a diagnosis, not a medical one, a story about what's wrong with you, or your life, or the world. It'll be partly accurate. That's essential. It'll name something you already half believed, which is why it lands with the force of revelation, rather than the suspicion of a sales pitch. And it will arrive attached to a solution that exists only here. The tell. You learned about your central problem from the same source that sells the answer. Stage 6. The public commitment. Something you say out loud in front of others, a testimony, a pledge, a role, an introduction of yourself in the group's terms. In 1951, Solomon Asch showed people a line and asked which of three others matched it. The answer was obvious, but when everyone else in the room confidently gave the wrong answer, a substantial share of subjects went along with it. Some, afterwards, weren't sure what they'd seen. Now make that public statement about your own identity in front of the only people you're still spending time with. Withdrawing it later doesn't just mean changing your mind, it means calling yourself a liar in front of everyone who matters to you. The tell. You've said something aloud that would be humiliating to take back. Stage 7. And this is the one that closes the door. The cost, money, time, a job, a move, a relationship. Years. By this point, you've given something you cannot get back. And a mind faced with a large unrecoverable loss does not usually cut and run. It doubles. Because leaving now doesn't just mean leaving. It means every one of those sacrifices was for nothing, and that conclusion is unbearable enough that staying starts to look like the rational option. The exit cost was not an accident. It was installed on the way in, one tooth at a time, by design. The tell. You're staying because of what leaving would mean about the past, not because of anything you expect from the future. Now count how many of those you've already seen. Because here's the turn, and it's the reason this video is about you and not about strange people in strange clothes. That sequence is not the property of cults. Cults are just where it runs at maximum concentration, which is what makes them useful to study. The mechanism is general. The workplace that calls itself a family, that gave you belonging first, that expanded until it ate your Sundays, that has a vocabulary for everything, and where leaving would mean your last 4 years were wasted. The online community with its own words, its own enemies, its own account of what's wrong with the world, where your identity is now public and reversing it would cost you every relationship you have there. The political identity that came with a diagnosis of the world, a solution available in one place, a public declaration, and a price for reconsidering. I'm not saying your job is a cult, it almost certainly isn't. I'm saying the machinery is identical, and only the dose is different. And a mechanism that works at high concentration works at low concentration too. It just works more slowly, and nobody makes documentaries about it. Now the part nobody warns you about, when someone you love is inside something like this, the instinct is to tell them to leave, to lay out the evidence, name the manipulation, be direct. It almost never works, and it usually costs you the ability to help at all, because stage 4 already predicted you. Your concern was described in advance as exactly the thing that would happen, and your directness confirms the prediction. You're not delivering evidence against the group. You're delivering it for them. And there's a harder thing to say, which is that knowing all of this does not make you immune. You now know the 7 stages. You'll recognize them in a documentary instantly. You will not reliably recognize them at stage 1 on a Tuesday evening among people being genuinely kind to you. Because at stage 1, there is nothing to recognize. That's not a gap in your knowledge. It's the design working as intended. What you get isn't immunity. It's a slightly better chance of noticing that the requests have been getting larger. Robert Jay Lifton spent his career on this, and the distinction he drew still holds up better than anything that's come after it. He argued that the question was never what a group believes. Strange beliefs are not the problem, and plenty of harmless groups hold extremely strange ones. The question is what the group does to your capacity to leave it. That's it. That's the whole test. Not the doctrine, not the clothes, not how odd it looks from outside. Just one thing. If you decided tomorrow that this wasn't for you, what would it cost you? And who installed that cost? So come back to the dinner. 9 people, good food, real warmth, and someone who remembered what you said. You were not manipulated that night. Nothing was done to you. The warmth was real and the interest was real. And that is precisely why it works and why treating recruitment as something that happens to weak or stupid people leaves you more exposed rather than less. The first tooth of a ratchet does not feel like a mechanism. It feels like being liked. You are not too clever for this. Nobody is. The people it worked on were mostly doing fine, and several of them were sharper than you or me. But you can learn to count the steps. To notice when closeness has outrun time, when the requests have been quietly escalating, when your vocabulary has changed, when the people who've known you longest have gone quiet. None of that makes you immune, and it just means you're facing the right direction. So out of the 7 stages, warmth, the small yes, the private language, the gradual replacement, the manufactured problem, the public commitment, or the cost? Which one did you recognize from somewhere in your own life? And be honest, because I don't think anyone gets through that list at 0. Tell me in the comments, I read them, and I'm curious which one people land on most. If this made you think of a specific situation, hit like and send it to the person you were thinking about while you watched. Not as an accusation, just so they have the list. Thank you for spending your time here with Cyclophy. Subscribe and turn on notifications so we can keep decoding the hidden machinery of the mind together. Goodbye, and see you next time.